done. The first and most important thing, you have to have your gun zeroed before you get here. It's already game day, but you have to have your gun zeroed or you're just wasting ammunition out here on these long range stages. It is a waste of ammo to be out here. I typically recommend with a scoped rifle, unless your gun has some sort of BDC integral in it, you need to obviously follow that. But typically I run a 200 meter zero, which is about 225 yards.
What's a BDC?
A bullet drop compensator. Some scopes have reticles that are calibrated to a certain load and have hash marks or dots or whatever that 100, 200, 300, and there's various different kinds. Like a Trijicon TA11 has a BDC in it, you just follow the BDC. But a lot of scopes don't. Actually, none of these scopes do that I'm going to be using today. And typically, I don't think in 3-gun you really need one. Although I got a new one coming from Leupold. Leupold's got a new BDC reticle that we're working on. But you got to have your gun zero. Like I said, 200 meters for a scope gun is what I usually run. With an iron-sighted rifle, I was typically running a 250-yard zero, but I think I'm going to switch over to a 300-yard zero. And the cool thing with iron sights is when you run a 300-yard zero, you pretty much hold 6 o'clock on every target in the match. The scope's a little different. These 223s that most of us could be shooting shoot very flat, but they are not laser beams. You have to compensate for holdovers. A lot of times people talk about you dead on at 50 is dead on at 200 or 250. That's somewhat true, but again, there's a lot of variation in these AR rifles. What they're talking about is there's a line of sight, and the bullet does this at the line of sight. And at 50 yards it crosses the line of sight, and then it arches to some peak, usually about 150, 175 yards, and then drops back down to your line of sight. And that peak is where a lot of people have trouble. In fact, you see it on this stage, those targets in 150 to 175, 180. Your gun is probably shooting, depending on your bullet, it's shooting from anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 inches high. So if you're shooting that plate and your reticle is on the top third of the plate and you have a perfect trigger press, you may miss because your gun is shooting 4 inches high at that distance. So you have to recognize that as you're shooting these stages, and it's better to think about it beforehand than during the stage as you're shooting along. So let's talk about this stage a little bit. I believe the LaRue, the first LaRue, is roughly, it's up 200 meters actually, and then you have the 3 R&Rs, and they're anywhere from 125 to 150, and then you have the plate rack, which again is probably about 150. So on those shots, those R&Rs, I'm going to be holding at 6 o'clock on the target. Because if you're holding dead on, you may have misses over the top. Because those plates aren't that big. I mean, they're only that big, and 3-4 inches, if your zero's off or your hold is off, can be a miss over the top. So the way I'll be shooting this would be dead on at the first target, 6 o'clock hold, 6 o'clock hold, 6 o'clock hold. Then there's that second LaRue, which is white. That's about 200-ish, maybe a little more. Dead on at that, 6 o'clock hold on the plate rack. And then that left-hand LaRue is about, I think we lasered it at 265. So my gun is probably shooting, well, I can tell you exactly. This is the magic of technology. So on that far LaRue, on the left-hand side, my gun should be shooting 3.25 inches low. So I'll probably hold dead on it. Now, there's a bonus target out there, which is at 385 meters, which is roughly a little over 400 yards. If you hit it, you get an 8-second bonus. So I don't know that it's worth it, because it's going to take 5 seconds to engage that target. And that's if you hit it in the first shot. And you only get 5 shots at it, and then after that, it's a procedural per shot fired. So the way this bonus target's set up, I think is kind of a wash. I don't know that it's worth engaging or not. But if I was going to engage it, I can look at my handy iPod here, and my gun would be shooting with a 200 meter zero with a 55 grain bullet. It is shooting about 22 inches low at that distance. Okay, so these guns shoot flat, but they're not laser beams. They don't shoot that flat. Your results may vary. If I was shooting a 75 grain bullet, which I normally do in my main match gun, you're going to have to hold a little higher. It's going to drop a little more because the 75s don't shoot as flat as the 55s, at least out to those distances. So that's the first thing you got to figure out. Where am I going to hold on all these targets? The second thing you gotta figure out is what positions am I gonna use on these barricades. I will take the bolt carrier out of this gun so we don't shoot Richard. And before I shoot a stage, there's always one thing I do. I always take my scope caps off. Because one time I saw Chief Kempton leave the scope cap on and he was up against a barricade and they kept doing this and the scope it would disappear and he'd pull the rifle back and it'd pop up and he'd, what's the matter? It took him like 30 seconds to figure it out. So I always take my scope cap off and then I always make sure my gun is zero because these knobs, they can turn. So I always make sure my gun's zeroed. I always make sure the gun is on the power if I have a variable scope and the power that I want it to be. Always do that before you start shooting. Because guaranteed, if you don't, you'll throw the gun up and the scope caps will be up and you'll be all black and you'll be on one power and you'll be, panic. You'll be in panic mode before you've fired one shot. So in this stage, I believe we shoot the targets from this spool and this spool. You see the spool's got a little bit of wobble in it, so you're going to want to lean into it to push it forward. Some barricades, if they have wobble, you want to pull them back, but I don't think that's going to work with this one, so you're going to want to lean into it. I would shoot reverse kneeling, so I'm not going to have both knees on the ground. I'm not going to have this knee up. I'm going to shoot reverse kneeling, which means I can rest my elbow on this knee. I like to shoot right to left. A lot of people like left to right, whatever. But I like right to left because it feels to me my position doesn't fall apart. If I shoot left to right, it's a little odd feeling, and I have to, so I prefer usually right to left. But you should practice both ways. So I dial in on the first target, which is at 200. Safety would be on, as soon as the buzzer goes off. And it would be dead on hold, 6 o'clock hold, 6 o'clock hold, 6 o'clock hold, dead on. And then I would shoot the plate rack from over there because I think that's a little more stable. And then a little high. Then you transition to the next barricade. Notice you don't break the 180. I see a lot of people come real close to breaking the 180 with these long guns, particularly when they move. And you know, I went to Norway and shot the European Rifle Championship. They don't have a 180. They have a 60. So you got to be super careful. So you see me move the rifle, I'm often doing this to keep the muzzle perfectly downrange pointed at a target. And then come over to this barricade, and I believe I would shoot. There's a couple different things you could do on this barricade. But again, I think I would shoot reverse kneeling, and I would push the mag well all the way up. So the handguard is got all this support on the handguard. It's going to blow the crap out of this carpet, but oh well. Push the handguard all the way up, or you could rest the gun in the magazine and you're sort of shooting prone like this. You can do it either way. I don't think it makes too much difference. This may be a little faster to transition. I think this is a little more stable. I don't think it matters much. When you're shooting these long-range courses, you have got to let the sight settle on the target. You cannot hose these courses down. You just can't. No one can. You've got to wait till the reticle settles on the target and break the shot. That's just the way it is. You just can't. If you're trying to try some cone of fire method, it won't work. It just doesn't. If you get desperate and you can't see a target because of lighting conditions, maybe then you go to cone of fire, but typically that is not the way to shoot these stages. One more comment, then we're going to have Grant shoot it. He's going to be my test subject. Typically when you're doing transitions and you're looking through a scope with some magnification, in this course, pretty much it's easy to stay in the scope and find all the targets. But if the targets are really spread out, I don't hunt for the targets in the scope. So I don't go bang, search for the target, bang. I would shoot, bang, and I would look, and then I'd drive the gun. I'd find the target without the scope, and then I would drive the gun to my eye. Again, that's different for different stages. This stage, you can pretty much stay in the scope through the whole course of fire.